Imagine a machine sitting right in the center of the American economy.
Okay.
And with just a few keystrokes, this machine can generate, I mean, literally trillions of dollars out of thin air, just in the blink of an eye.
Right. It sounds totally made up.
But
Yep.
like a plot device in a bad heist movie or something, but it's entirely real. That machine is the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, the Fed.
And today we are doing a deep dive into the completely radical financial experiment they launched right after the 2008 financial crisis.
Which is a huge topic.
Massive. And to get to the bottom of it, we're looking at two incredibly detailed, highly credentialed, and honestly, completely contradictory sources.
Right. We have Christopher Leonard's book, The Lures of Easy Money, which is this really explosive critique of the Fed.
Yeah, and then on the other side, we have this blistering review of that exact book by William Poole, who is a former president of the St. Louis Fed.
So he knows the system from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
And, our goal here isn't to just pick a side and say who's right.
No, definitely not.
We want to unpack the actual mechanics, like how is money created? Why does it matter to, your wallet? And how can two experts look at the exact same data and draw totally opposite conclusions?
Exactly. So let Phil jump right in, set the scene for us.
Okay, so to understand the sheer scale of this experiment, we have to go back to November 3rd, 2010.
Yep.
We were in this windowless conference room in Washington, D.C., and sitting at this long mahogany table is Thomas Hoenig.
Right.
Yeah, he's the president of the Kansas City Fed at the time. He's a career central banker, almost 4 decades in the system.
So he's not an outsider.
Not at all. But on this particular day, Hoenig is preparing to vote no. He is about to be the lone dissenter against the entire Federal Open Market Committee.
Wow, one guy.
Just one guy desperately trying to throw a wrench into the gears of Wall Street.
So why was he so terrified? I mean, what did Hoenig see that everyone else in that room supposedly just missed?
Well, Hoenig saw a fundamental shift in how the Fed was using its ultimate superpower.
Which is the ability to just create U.S. dollars from nothing.
Exactly. I mean, for most of its history, the Fed managed the economy using a fairly standard mechanism. If things were sluggish, they lowered short-term interest rates.
Right, making borrowing cheaper.
Right. You make loans cheaper, businesses take out money, they expand, people spend, and then if inflation gets too high, they raise rates to cool it down.
It's a pretty straightforward lever, but then 2008 happens.
Yeah, the whole financial system just melts down. The traditional playbook completely fell apart.
Because the Fed slashed those interest rates all the way down to zero.
Right.
And the economy was still barely breathing.
Yeah, and you can't lower rates below zero. I mean, the main tool was just useless at that point.
So the toolkit is empty. What do?
They pivot. They pivot to this massive strategy called quantitative easing, or QE.
QE, right.
Yeah.
We hear that term a lot.
Yeah, but instead of just tweaking the cost of borrowing, they decided to just pump raw cash directly into the financial system.
Just flooding it.
Flooding it. They did this by purchasing massive, and I mean massive, quantities of government bonds and mortgage-backed securities from banks.
Okay, wait, let's pause there for a second. Because terms like mortgage-backed securities get thrown around on the news all the time. But nobody ever explains them.
Fair point. So a mortgage-backed security is basically just a giant bundle of individual home loans.
Right.
Think of it like a financial smoothie.
A smoothie?
Yeah, you take thousands of individual mortgages, like my mortgage, your mortgage, you blend them all together, and Wall Street sells slices of that smoothie to investors.
Oh, okay. And the banks were holding massive amounts of these smoothies in 2008.
Exactly. So during QE, the Fed steps in and just buys these bundles, along with standard government bonds, directly from the Wall Street banks.
And how are they paying for them? They don't have a giant vault of cash, right?
No, they literally just type numbers into a computer.
Yeah.
They credit the bank's accounts with newly created money out of nowhere.
Okay, so if the normal approach of lowering interest rates is like a city lowering the cost of water so farmers plant more crops,
Sure.
then QE is the city just showing up, buying the entire harvest at triple the price, and forcing raw cash directly into the farmers' bank accounts.
That's a great way to put it. They flooded the banks with money, basically assuming those banks would then turn around and lend it out to Main Street.
To build factories, hire workers, that kind of thing.
Right. But the scale of this,
Yeah.
Christopher Leonard quantifies this in his book, and the numbers are just staggering.
How staggering are we talking?
Okay, the amount of excess money in the banking system went from $200 billion in 2008 to $1.2 trillion in 2010.
Wait, trillion with a T.
With a T. Prior to the 2008 crisis, it would have taken roughly 60 years to add that much money to the system.
Wow.
The Fed did it in months.
So it's a 52,000% increase, which brings us back to the big question. Did that money actually make it to Main Street?
Well, according to Leonard, no. It misfired completely.
So where did it go?
Instead of trickling down to everyday businesses, that money just pooled in the financial sector. Leonard outlines this chain reaction of 3 major failures.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first is severe asset price inflation.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of that. Like, why does flooding banks with cash cause asset prices to suddenly spike?
Comes down to this concept called yield chasing.
Yield chasing.
Yeah. So with the Fed keeping baseline interest rates at basically zero, incredibly safe investments like a U.S. Treasury bond were yielding practically no return.
Right, you make no money holding them.
Exactly. But investors, hedge funds, pension funds, wealthy individuals, they still need to make a profit. A pension fund has to pay its retirees.
Oh, so flushed with all this new cash from the Fed buying their old bonds, they have to go look for returns somewhere else.
You got it. So
Yeah.
they poured that money into the stock market, they poured it into real estate, art, eventually things like cryptocurrencies.
Just searching for any kind of return, which artificially drives up the price of all those things.
Completely disconnected from their actual economic value.
And you can see how this totally distorts reality for a normal person listening to this.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, you are doing the responsible thing, right? You're putting money in a savings account, and you're earning 0% interest.
Nothing.
Meanwhile, billions of dollars are flowing into the housing market, and the price of a home in your neighborhood just skyrockets, totally out of reach.
And that flow of cheap money creates Leonard's next major symptom, which is the rise of what he calls zombie companies.
Zombie companies? That sounds bad.
It is. In a healthy capitalist system, if an inefficient company doesn't make a profit, it should theoretically go bankrupt, right?
Right. It clears the way for new, better businesses.
But when borrowing costs are basically zero, these failing companies don't die. They just take out new, ultra-cheap loans to pay off their old debts.
So they just roll the debt over indefinitely.
Exactly. They don't actually make enough profit to cover their obligations, but the cheap money just keeps their heart beating. They're corporate zombies.
And I'm guessing because massive amounts of capital are tied up keeping these zombies on life support, that money isn't flowing to, like, productive startups.
Or being used to raise employee wages.
Right.
And that leads to Leonard's ultimate conclusion.
Yeah.
You have this stagnation of middle-class wages contrasted with the massive inflation of stock and real estate portfolios.
So the Fed's policies drastically widened wealth inequality in America.
According to Leonard, yes. The money entered through Wall Street, and it largely stayed there.
I mean, that is a terrifying narrative. But, and here's the other side of the coin. If their only traditional tool was broken and the entire global economy was collapsing, what else were they supposed to do?
And this is exactly where William Poole enters the chat.
Okay, let's bring in Poole. What is his counter-argument?
So Poole reads Leonard's entire critique, and he essentially argues that Leonard is grading the Federal Reserve on a test it was never supposed to take.
Interesting. What does he mean by that?
Poole brings in this really fundamental principle of macroeconomics. Basically, to achieve multiple policy goals, you need multiple policy instruments.
Okay, so you can't achieve 3 different outcomes with only one tool.
Right. And the Federal Reserve, at its core, really only has one macroeconomic instrument, the short-term interest rate.
It's like trying to build an entire house when the only tool in your tool belt is a hammer.
Exactly.
Like, sure, you can frame the walls with a hammer, but you can't use it to paint the living room or wire the electricity.
That's a perfect analogy.
Okay.
Because the Fed is mandated by law to do 2 things: maximize employment and stabilize prices. That's it.
They are trying to hit those 2 massive targets with their one hammer.
Yes. And Poole argues that it is mathematically and economically impossible for the Fed to use that single instrument to simultaneously control the distribution of wealth, prevent corporate debt bubbles, and fix income inequality.
Okay, so if the Fed isn't equipped to solve inequality or put an end to zombie companies, whose job is it?
According to Poole.
Congress.
Yeah. Poole points out that if we really want to stop corporations from taking on dangerous levels of debt, Congress could change tax laws tomorrow. They could scale back the deductibility of corporate interest.
Making it less profitable to be a zombie.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we want to make the banking system safer and stop Wall Street speculation, regulators need to step up and raise bank capital standards.
Right.
Adjusting the baseline cost of money at the Fed cannot fix a broken tax code or, a structural lack of housing inventory.
That shifts the perspective entirely, doesn't it? I mean, now we are looking at a single institution, the Fed just frantically swinging its hammer to keep the economy from collapsing.
While the legislative branches are basically asleep at the wheel.
Right. Refusing to use their own tools.
Yeah. But here's where things get really intense. Even though Leonard and Poole fundamentally disagree on what the Fed's job should be, they actually agree on one looming catastrophe.
And what's that?
They both agree the Federal Reserve has trapped itself.
The exit problem.
Yes, the exit problem.
Yeah.
And Poole provides this brilliant real-world analogy in his review to explain this trap.
Okay, let's hear it.
He describes a retired Delaware Bay pilot.
Okay.
Now, these pilots are highly specialized navigators. They board these giant 900-foot commercial oil tankers to guide them through narrow, difficult waterways into port.
Right, they get on the massive ship and they have to hit the Philadelphia dock at exactly high tide.
Exactly.
Ugh.
And to make the timing, the ship has to run up the bay at absolute top speed.
Okay.
But imagine the pilot arrives on the bridge and the ship's captain delivers a terrifying piece of information. The ship's reverse gear is broken.
Oh, man. And a 900-foot tanker moving at top speed has immense momentum.
Immense.
Yes.
Even with the engines in full reverse, it takes about 2 miles of water just to come to a stop.
So without a reverse gear hurtling toward a concrete dock, I mean, a catastrophic collision is mathematically guaranteed unless they pull off a miracle.
That is the exact situation the Fed is in. They pumped trillions of dollars into the economy to keep the ship moving forward during the 2008 crisis.
But eventually you have to slow down. You have to pull that money out of the system and raise interest rates to prevent runaway inflation.
But when the Fed tried to do that, they discovered their reverse gear was broken.
So what does a broken reverse gear actually look like in the financial system?
Well, we saw exactly what it looks like in the fall of 2019.
Okay, what happened?
The Fed tried to normalize things. They slowly started shrinking their balance sheet, raising rates just a little bit.
Yeah.
And almost immediately, this critical piece of financial plumbing called the repo market just seized up.
Okay, let's unpack the repo market because that sounds like pure Wall Street jargon.
It does. But think of the repo market like a massive high-end pawn shop for banks.
A pawn shop.
Yeah. Banks are legally required to hold a certain amount of actual cash at the end of every single day.
Right.
If a bank is short on cash, they take a super safe asset, like a treasury bond, and hand it over to another financial institution in exchange for an overnight cash loan.
Like pawning a watch to get cash for the night?
Exactly. And then the next morning, the bank repurchases that bond back with a tiny bit of interest.
No, so it's an overnight repurchase agreement, repo.
You got it. It's how banks ensure they have enough liquid cash to just function on a daily basis.
So what went wrong in 2019?
Well, when the Fed started pulling money out of the broader economy, the cash in this overnight pawn shop suddenly dried up.
Just disappeared.
Yeah. Suddenly, there were way too many bonds floating around and not enough actual cash to lend against them. Interest rates in the repo market, which are usually around like 2%, they violently spiked to 10% in a matter of hours.
Whoa. 10% overnight.
Yes. The market panicked.
Yeah.
Without access to cheap daily cash, the entire banking system threatened to lock up completely.
Which brings us right back to Thomas Hoenig in that windowless room in 2010.
Exactly.
The 2019 repo crisis was the manifestation of his exact fear. The system had become so completely addicted to the flood of cheap money that the moment the Fed tried to withdraw the drug, the patient goes into cardiac arrest.
The ship couldn't slow down without crashing.
So what did the Fed do? Did they let it crash?
No. They abandoned the reverse gear. They panicked. They bought billions in bonds to flood the repo market with cash. And they turned the money spigots back on.
Unbelievable.
And then, just a few months later, COVID hit.
Right. And instead of finding a way to fix the reverse gear, the Fed just doubles down.
Triples down. I mean, in just 2 months at the start of the pandemic, the Fed printed 300 years worth of money.
Right. 300 years?
300 years. They bought corporate bonds, municipal bonds. They completely crossed the Rubicon. Over a few short years, the total money supply basically quadrupled. The trap just snapped shut permanently.
Wow. So the trap is clearly a shared concern between Leonard and Poole.
Definitely.
But we need to look at how these two sources arrive at their specific conclusions. Because Poole aggressively fact-checks Leonard's evidence throughout the book. And as a listener, you need to hear the mechanics of this disagreement to make up your own mind.
Absolutely.
So let's look at the whole Rexnord debate.
Rexnord. This is a major sticking point in Leonard's book. He focuses heavily on this Midwest manufacturing company, Rexnord, portraying it as the ultimate zombie.
Right, a firm kept alive purely by financial engineering.
Exactly. But Leonard uses Rexnord specifically to attack Jerome Powell, who is the current chair of the Federal Reserve.
Right, because before taking over the Fed, Powell was a partner at the Carlyle Group.
Which is a massive private equity firm.
And Carlyle owned Rexnord. So Leonard's narrative connects the dots, right? He's basically saying the guy running the Fed used to run these debt-fueled zombie companies. Therefore, the Fed's policies are designed by Wall Street for Wall Street.
It's a compelling narrative. But Poole calls this out as arguing purely by innuendo. He says Leonard is deliberately ignoring the tangible facts of the business.
So what did Poole find when he looked at the facts?
Well, Poole didn't rely on a story. He went straight to Rexnord's 2020 SEC 10K filings.
They're legally binding financial disclosures?
Right. And he found a company holding dozens of active patents, operating 46 manufacturing and distribution facilities worldwide, and employing 23,000 full-time workers.
That's a massive operation.
Huge. Managing global logistics at that scale requires intense operational competence. It's not just a paper trick. Poole argues Leonard completely ignores Rexnord's actual manufacturing output just to force this, convenient villainous narrative about Jerome Powell.
Okay, hold on, though. I actually have to push back here.
Sure.
Because a company can have 46 factories and 23,000 employees and still be a corporate zombie, right?
In theory.
If all its revenue is just going toward servicing the interest on massive loans taken out by its private equity owners, having patents doesn't negate the fact that Carlyle might have loaded them up with toxic debt. Does Poole actually prove the debt structure wasn't toxic?
That is a very fair challenge. And the answer is no, not definitively. Poole's point isn't necessarily that Rexnord is this paragon of financial health with zero debt.
Okay, then what is his point?
His point is that Leonard uses the term zombie as an emotional bludgeon rather than a real economic diagnosis. By omitting the massive scale of their actual operations and focusing solely on the private equity maneuvers, Poole argues Leonard is committing a sin of omission to manipulate the reader.
I see. And that debate over who is truly to blame stretches all the way back to the root cause of the 2008 crisis itself, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, Leonard builds his entire premise on the idea that the Fed's excessive money printing and poor regulatory oversight caused the 2008 mortgage meltdown in the first place.
And Poole disagrees.
Strongly. Poole actually accuses Leonard of scholarly malpractice for making that claim.
Scholarly malpractice. Wow. In the economics world, that is throwing down the gauntlet.
It really is.
Well, what is Poole's evidence for that?
Poole points to the Financial Crisis Inquiry Commission. Specifically, he cites the Minority Report written by Peter Wallison. Poole argues that you simply cannot blame the Federal Reserve's interest rates for the 2008 crisis, while totally ignoring the massive structural role of government housing policies.
Walk us through the mechanism of that. How did government policy force the housing bubble?
So, Wallison's report details how the Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD, implemented these really aggressive, affordable housing regulations.
Right.
These regulations essentially mandated that government-sponsored enterprises, which is Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, purchased massive quotas of weak subprime mortgages.
Wait, so the government was actively forcing these agencies to buy loans from people who, under traditional banking standards, could not afford to pay them back.
Exactly. They had quotas to hit. And because the broader financial market knew that Fannie and Freddie were implicitly backed by the federal government, Wall Street just assumed these risky mortgages were totally safe.
Because the government would bail them out.
Right. It created a colossal moral hazard. Banks thought, well, why wouldn't we issue terrible loans if the government is basically guaranteeing them?
They just passed the buck.
Yeah. Wallison argues, and Poole agrees, that this specific government mandate is what truly inflated the toxic housing bubble, not just the Fed tweaking interest rates.
So from Poole's perspective, blaming the central bank for 2008 is like blaming the fire department for an arsonist's fire?
Exactly. He's saying Leonard completely ignores Congress and HUD's direct role in forcing bad mortgages into the financial plumbing.
Wow. It really perfectly encapsulates a tension between our two sources today.
It does.
I mean, you have Leonard's narrative of this rogue central bank enriching Wall Street going head-to-head with Poole's narrative of a totally constrained central bank, one that's just forced to clean up the fallout of terrible government policies armed with only a single blunt hammer.
Yep. But regardless of whose macroeconomic theory is correct, the reality of the trap still remains.
We are still on the ship with no reverse gear.
Exactly. And there is this chilling quote from a 2012 Fed meeting in Leonard's book that I think really highlights the danger of relying purely on theory.
What's the quote?
So, someone raised a concern from business leaders on the ground about how QE was warping local economies. And Ben Bernanke, who was the Fed chair at the time, replied, "I do want to urge you not to overweight the macroeconomic opinions of private sector people who are not trained in economics."
Oh, man. The absolute intellectual arrogance of that statement.
Right. It is the ultimate disconnect between that windowless room in Washington and the actual factory floor in the Midwest.
Because they're just looking at spreadsheets.
When you rely solely on pristine mathematical models to drive a 900-foot tanker,
Yeah.
and you dismiss the actual pilot telling you the reverse gear is broken just because he isn't trained in economics, you are courting disaster.
Wow. Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We've looked at the machine that creates trillions out of thin air, the mechanics of how that money floods the system, and the terrifying reality of a ship with no brakes. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over. If the Federal Reserve's massive money printing experiment has fundamentally altered the value of assets, I mean, if the price of a house or a share of stock is permanently inflated by central bank intervention rather than real economic value,
Right.
and if they truly have lost their reverse gear to bring things back to normal, what happens to the traditional American concept of saving and hard work?
Yeah, it's the real question.
For the next generation, if the only realistic way to build wealth is to already own assets that are being artificially propped up by a central bank, have we permanently changed what it actually means to participate in the economy? Keep questioning the consensus, stay curious, and we will see you next time.